Welcome to the Republican Roundtable. I'm Max Reimer. As Republicans and as conservatives, we know that we're one lawsuit away from freedom being taken from us, and today we have a guest in specifically to talk about a lot of these different issues that we're facing from a legal standpoint in our country and from in the state specifically, updating us on what's happening. From the Alliance Defending Freedom and current candidate for Attorney General of Minnesota, we have Doug Wardlow. Doug, thank you for joining us on the Republican Roundtable today.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
So let's get this out of the way first, because you are running for a statewide election.
That's correct, yes.
How are things going?
Very well. We're getting all around the state, going to Thief River Falls, to Ely, down to the southern part of the state, and the message is resonating. People in Minnesota are looking for a candidate that can provide conservative leadership at the top. And I think the Attorney General's office is a very important one because the Attorney General can enter into any lawsuit, appear in any lawsuit whenever the Attorney General thinks it's in the best interest of the state to do so. Mm-hmm. So that's a very powerful position. And we need an Attorney General who's going to focus on the rule of law and the Constitution and defend constitutional rights. And I know how to do that because that's what I do every day. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely.
With regard to religious freedom and free speech. So.
Within the campaign itself, I know it's very easy for us as just your average constituent to get caught up in races like the governor or the presidential race this past year. What kind of questions do you get as an attorney general candidate that are any different than, say, what a governor candidate would get?
Well, I think the number one question I get is, what does the attorney general do?
Yeah.
A lot of people just don't know. And that's partially the result of the fact that the Democrats have had that office for nearly 5 decades, so almost half a century. And Lori Swanson and Mike Hatch before her mm-hmm. have really done a lot of things to the office to make it more political. They have gutted the criminal law operations of the office. They have put a lot of focus into consumer protection and a lot of resources there because I think they can use that to get cases in the headlines and then advance their own political careers. And that's really unfortunate. So you don't hear a lot about the Attorney General's office except for with respect to consumer fraud. So that's probably the number one question I get is what does the Attorney General do? But the Attorney General's office does quite a bit. Like I said before, the Attorney General can enter into any lawsuit when it's in the best interest of the state to do so. The Attorney General investigates healthcare fraud, welfare fraud. Mm-hmm. The Attorney General supports county attorneys in prosecutions. The Attorney General does all of these different things. And we need to get an Attorney General who's going to put an emphasis back on criminal law, public safety, but also an emphasis back on freedom and our constitutional liberties. Because without that kind of leadership at the top, the rule of law in Minnesota is really under threat.
Yes, absolutely. So you being uniquely qualified to run for Attorney General, the Alliance Defending Freedom, can you tell us a little bit about that organization and what you do, what they stand for, and why you're in Minnesota right now?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm from Minnesota, originally born and raised in Eagan, and now in Prior Lake. And Alliance Defending Freedom is a Christian and conservative nonprofit legal organization, and it litigates. So we litigate cases all around the country, including right here in Minnesota, in defense of religious liberty and rights of conscience and free speech. So a lot of First Amendment cases. And the mission of Alliance Defending Freedom is really to make sure that those freedoms are viable and thrive in our country, to make sure that people have the right to live their lives and operate their businesses according to their most sincerely and deeply held beliefs.
That's incredibly important in today's day and age because there's a lot of different headlines out there. I mean, from baking cakes to,
yes, indeed, yeah.
We're going to get into this Belle Plaine situation mm-hmm. where people are not able to effectively practice, their right of conscience and to do business with certain people or based on their religious beliefs. So that's very important. Touching on that Belle Plaine situation, mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I know from just in the metro area,
right.
We're just hearing about this situation with, essentially it was a military.
Right. So the city of Belle Plaine has a Veterans Memorial Park, like many cities do, and so in the Veterans Memorial Park in Belle Plaine, citizens had erected a memorial that honored war dead, and the memorial featured the silhouette of a soldier kneeling down before a gravesite, and the gravesite is marked by a cross. And so what happened was the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which is a secularist atheist group out of Wisconsin, they came in and they found a person in Belle Plaine to complain about this monument in the city park, and then they threatened to sue the city if the city didn't remove the monument. They claimed that it was a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. Of course, that's preposterous because, first of all, the cross in that depiction is marking a gravesite. It's sort of like a cross that you would see at Arlington National Cemetery on a gravesite marker, right? It's not serving a religious purpose. But nonetheless, the city of Belle Plaine, under pressure, buckled. And they had the cross actually cut out from the memorial, and that caused some outrage in the community, you can imagine. And so I represented a group of folks, veterans, in the city of Belle Plaine, and we went to the city council and we proposed what's called a limited public forum. We rallied the community for religious freedom and for free speech, and we got this policy put in place and got the memorial put back up. Now, the story didn't end there. The proposal I put forward would have limited the limited public forum to Belle Plaine residents. And that makes sense, right? Because it's a park for Belle Plaine residents.
Memorial.
Exactly. That's right, exactly. But for whatever reason, there was a week delay between the time we made that proposal and was adopted to the time it was a different proposal, slightly different, was sort of readopted.
Okay.
And they took out that bit about requiring only
Plaine.
Belle Plaine residents to put things up in the forum, and then a bunch of different things happened. We got a Satanist group from Massachusetts that got rid of this. But it's a group that's closely related to the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and basically exists to go around and bully cities and governments into caving.
Okay.
And then we had some Catholic folks from Pennsylvania coming in to protest because the Satanist group.
They need Mary there, or
well,
what?
I'm sorry. The Satanist group said we're going to put up our own satanic monument.
Yes.
In your forum. And of course, if we had adopted the original proposal, that would have been possible because it would have been Belle Plaine residents only.
Okay.
And so things spiraled and got a little bit crazy. But the fact of the matter is this: two things. First of all, if we had an attorney general that was going to stand up for constitutional rights, like I would, the attorney general should have said, Belle Plaine, if you get sued by the Freedom from Religion Foundation, we've got your back. Our office is going to provide defense for you, and then that would have solved the problem. Secondly, it was a victory in the end because what happened was the community was rallied for religious freedom, and so all over Belle Plaine and all over surrounding communities, you see copies of the silhouette of the soldier and the cross going up in people's yards, like every other house almost in Belle Plaine, it seemed, and then I even seen some in Wisconsin. So the entire community rallied, and people understand the importance of religious freedom and free speech in the public square.
So what I find fascinating about that whole situation then is you have the Freedom from Religion Foundation that's based in Wisconsin. You have some satanic group in Massachusetts.
They're not really satanic. They actually don't believe in God at all. They
Right.
only exist to bully cities
Right.
and counties and whatnot. But
It sounds like a troll job.
It is. It's really quite terrible.
How do those types of groups find out about a situation like this? So in this specific case, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and then what I assume to be the Church of Satan in Massachusetts.
I forget what it's called. It's I think it's the Satanic Temple of Massachusetts.
Okay, so
which is,
how do they find out about
this is what they exist
situation?
to do. This is what they exist to do. So they actually have members around the country, and they look for situations. They look for memorials where religion is in the public square. They look for these things, and then they decide, and then they find ways to attack them. That's the point of their existence, is to push religion out of the public square. And of course, we know the First Amendment doesn't require a complete separation of church from state. What it requires is that government may not establish religion, may not control religion, and it protects religion from government control. And then it also protects free exercise, so people's right to freely exercise their beliefs. That means the ability to worship, but also the ability to live their lives according to their sincerely held religious beliefs or convictions. And so that's how it's supposed to work. But the Freedom from Religion people, they just don't like religion, and they want it out.
And they coordinate then with the Satanic Temple in Massachusetts.
It appears that they do.
To bring them in.
It appears that they do. All signs are that is what happens.
So that is what we are up against as either foundationalists or constitutionalists or conservatives.
Right. Anyone who believes in freedom, really.
Yep.
The ability to worship, free speech, or freedom of religion, free exercise. Believe in these things. The Constitution means what it says. Yes, that's what we're up against. Okay. These folks are really trying to impose sort of a secularist orthodoxy of their own, right?
Right.
On the state, and that's contrary to the First Amendment too. So,
what other types of cases like this are you working on currently in the state of Minnesota that we should be aware of? Because again, for the folks at home, these are things that we need to be aware of that are happening every day. These little nitpicky attempts to either poke at our constitutional rights or our religious rights, what have you. It's happening every day. What kind of cases are you seeing here in the state of Minnesota?
Well, there are a couple different things going on. First, the Minnesota Department of Education Student Safety Technical Assistance Council, which is
Do they have an acronym for that?
the SSTAC, of course, which is
Yes. It
simple
sounds
to remember.
It sounds like
Basically,
something that would have an
right,
acronym.
yeah, right.
So
it's a bunch of bureaucrats that sit around inside the Department of Education, sort of. And I think it's within the Department of Education, but it's sort of free-floating.
Okay.
It's one of these, the Democrats tend to like to build commissions and things.
Of course.
Or the far left.
You don't know where their funding comes from.
It's unclear where the funding comes from. I think it was created by the anti-bullying bill. And so what it does is, so they adopted a set of work. Actually, they created a work group that then went out to study transgender issues, and then that work group reported back to the SSTAC, and the SSTAC adopted this transgender toolkit, gender toolkit, and I'm not sure what exactly they're calling it, but it's a set of recommendations for all public schools in the state with respect to how to handle students who identify themselves as belonging to a sex other than their actual biological sex. And it's a very problematic document because it tells schools to do things like allow opposite biological sex kids to mix in locker rooms and even on overnight accommodations if one student identifies as transgender. Now that of course violates the privacy rights of students. And then also it instructs or asks schools to basically police pronouns.
Okay.
So telling students and teachers to use the pronoun for a student that reflects the gender identity that they choose as opposed to their actual biological sex. And if you think about that, so at first you might think, well, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is you're telling a person what they can and cannot say, and you're telling them to say something about fundamental reality that may conflict with their beliefs. And the government can't do that. The government can't say, you must speak this way, or you must express this view, when it's contrary to your religious beliefs or contrary to, well, actually just to your beliefs.
Right.
The government doesn't have in America, because of the First Amendment, the power to tell you what you can think or what you can say.
Within this gender toolkit or these guidelines or whatever, what would be the punishment to all of this? What are the implications for our schools in Minnesota should they decide to not follow?
They should
guidelines?
not. They shouldn't follow the guidelines, and there's right now at least there's nothing that the government can do if they don't follow the guidelines.
Okay.
So I wrote a letter to every single school board member in the state and every superintendent, telling them don't implement these suggested guidelines, because if you do, you'll be violating student privacy rights. You'll be violating the right of parents to direct the upbringing of their children, and you'll also be violating the First Amendment when it comes to free speech. Or your schools may be doing that if that situation with a transgender student arises. So we need to be vigilant for these kinds of things, as the First Amendment is so important.
And with this type of initiative or these types of guidelines, not necessarily, to be clear, not necessarily coming from a legislative body.
That's right. That's a good point. No, not at all. Coming from this
Bureaucratic
bureaucratic body.
How do you combat that? How do we take that on and effectively counteract that? Because there are all sorts. I looked at the commissions list. All right.
Right.
The commissions you can be a part of.
Yes.
There are hundreds of these commissions, and what they are dedicated to is giving money out, is deciding who gets special treatment in the marketplace. That's what these things are dedicated to.
Right.
With an initiative like this, how as conservatives or Republicans, how do we combat that?
That's why it's so critically important that we get people elected to the legislature, the governorship, and also the attorney general. And that's why one of the reasons I'm running for attorney general is to make sure that the rule of law is enforced. Because this multiplicity of commissions and agencies, we have over 100,000 rules, regulatory pronouncements.
We're probably breaking one.
Oh, I'm sure we are. So you can never know if you're actually following the law, and the law is not actually passed by your legislators. Then what good is really the law? You don't really have a rule of law then.
Right.
You have selective enforcement, and you have unelected folks writing the rules that govern our lives. So we need to have awareness of that issue, and we need to have legislators and a governor and attorney general that can provide leadership on this and say, hey, this is the problem. And so this burdens freedom. This prevents people from opening businesses. This hinders people in living their lives according to their beliefs. It basically is the heavy hand of government, pushing down upon people. And if we want to allow Minnesotans to live lives of meaning and really thrive in our state and have an economy that's thriving, we need to limit and pull back on the regulatory state.
Yeah. It seems like such an uphill battle, such an intimidating task to take on something that was not even originated legislatively.
Right. Yes. No. So that's why it's critically important we can do it in court.
Yep.
The attorney general, as attorney general, I would look for ways to push back at the administrative state. That means bringing actions where necessary, joining into actions where people are challenging administrative overreach. Also, the Attorney General is often the legal representative of an agency when the agency is enforcing a rule.
Okay.
So the Attorney General can then counsel the client, the agency, hey, this might be a little burdensome. We shouldn't interpret this way. And if there's something that's clearly unconstitutional, the Attorney General can issue an opinion and say that's not right.
Yeah.
So there are so many different things that the Attorney General can do to combat the administrative state and really unleash the power of free enterprise.
So kind of getting back to this freedom conscious, you and I had talked a little bit before the camera started rolling about this situation in Michigan with, or it may have been Colorado.
Colorado, yes.
Sorry
yes,
about
yes.
that. Yeah. The it's
Masterpiece
the
Cake Shop.
Cake
Yes.
Shop.
This is the most important First Amendment case that we have
Right.
seen in decades. So it's Jack Phillips is a cake artist. He makes custom cakes for weddings and other kinds of celebrations.
Okay.
And he has a very nice cake shop, and he also sells other baked goods in his shop. But he makes custom cakes for customers, and he declined to create a cake. So he declined to use his artistic, expressive capabilities, right, for a cake that would have celebrated a same-sex wedding ceremony. And that's perfectly acceptable because we shouldn't have a government that coerces people to violate their beliefs. But what happened was this same-sex couple, they were able to go to a very close-by cake artist, and they got their rainbow-themed cake that they wanted free. And yet they still brought a lawsuit against Jack Phillips for violating Colorado's anti-discrimination law. And the Colorado Civil Rights Commission decided against Jack Phillips and determined that he had violated the anti-discrimination law, allegedly discriminating based on sexual orientation. But the thing is, the First Amendment doesn't allow the government to come in and tell a creative professional how to use their gifts and tell them what kind of expression they may or may not create. And it's interesting, the order against Jack Phillips and his cake shop by the Civil Rights Commission actually ordered him to send his staff to essentially re-education.
Okay.
And then to do quarterly compliance reports for 2 years. So this is the government coming in and saying, this is the orthodoxy, you will do this. You will express something that violates your sincerely held religious beliefs.
Yes.
Or else the heavy hand of the law is going to come down on you. So it's a lot like just imagine, it'd be like the government forcing a Democrat pro-Hillary Clinton speechwriter to write speeches for President Trump.
Right.
That's just not right.
And to go to basically church to learn why President Trump is a good person to write speeches for.
And now you will agree with. Yeah, it's just terrible. And so then the Colorado Court of Appeals affirmed the decision of the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, and now it's on appeal up to the United States Supreme Court.
Okay.
And our Senior Vice President of U.S. Legal Advocacy, Kristen Wagner, will be arguing the case on December 5th to the United States Supreme Court. So this is a very important case.
As you look forward to that date in December, what are your general, being just a future prediction type guy that I am, looking at that case, what do we think is going to happen?
Well, I'm very hopeful that the Supreme Court is going to see what is true, and that is that the First Amendment protects individuals and business owners' ability to control their businesses and they cannot be forced to express things that they disagree with. So it really comes down to that. Can the government compel a person with the force of law to create expression, to send a message that they disagree with fundamentally? And the answer to that has to be no, or else the First Amendment means nothing. So what hangs in the balance of this case is the First Amendment itself.
The natural argument that you tend to get from Democrats or liberals on an issue like this is it's turned around to things like restaurants, or refusing to serve somebody because they are black. That's kind of the natural, at least the natural pushback that I've seen when a case like this does come up. What is the difference between a case like this and a case like that where there is blatant discrimination? It's a business that is open to the public. Is there a difference? I don't know.
Yes, there is there are a number of differences, very, very big differences. First of all, race, that's a completely different kind of category. Race, our country went through a civil war, and then we had 2 different constitutional amendments passed to deal with racial discrimination, right? So that means that the eradication of racial discrimination has been elevated to the most important kind of compelling government interest. So it has a special status in our constitutional law. And so that separates that case. It's a completely different kind of analysis. And then also, you were talking about, say, a restaurant. That's a different situation because, so Jack Phillips, he would have sold this same-sex couple any of the baked goods in his store. He would have sold them just a sheet cake, whatever it was. But the problem was that, and the issue was that they asked him to create a custom cake and therefore create expression that violates Jack Phillips' sincerely held beliefs. Okay. And to basically participate in celebrating something that he has particular religious views about, and that would violate his religious views. And so that's the difference. It's not just like walking into a restaurant and being served. It's about creating expression that violates your beliefs. So the government cannot compel speech.
And being participatory in this ceremony or
Yes.
in this thing that they don't believe in.
That's right. The government cannot order a person or threaten them with basically force and say, otherwise we will fine you and we will send you to re-education. It can't force you to engage in artistic expression that's contrary to beliefs. So if the government can do that, then the guarantee of free speech means nothing.
And I tend to get the feeling that it would be a little bit different if it was a liberal cake shop and it was a Make America Great Again.
That's
cake.
actually true. And there were 3 different cake shops. The same Civil Rights Commission in Colorado that found that Jack Phillips had violated the anti-discrimination law. Well, 3 different cake shops refused to make a cake for a Christian person expressing their views on marriage, and the Civil Rights Commission found that did not violate the anti-discrimination law.
Yeah.
So right there you have viewpoint discrimination, right? You have
Right.
one view being favored and one view being disfavored, and that's unconstitutional under the First Amendment as well.
And there was a point that you made within that case specifically that if the Supreme Court doesn't do what we think it will do, the First Amendment is under some serious fire at that point. What precedent does that set?
Well, that would be a terrible precedent, because that would mean that the government can compel you to violate your sincerely held beliefs about your religious beliefs or just any beliefs. It can tell you what to say and what not to say, and that basically means the government can enforce an orthodoxy. So what's left of the First Amendment if that's the case? Right. Not very much. So that's why I'm very hopeful that the Supreme Court is going to decide this the right way, because if they don't, it would mean gutting the First Amendment.
As we step back and kind of talk a little bit more philosophically about the Constitution and being an originalist and saying the Constitution means what it says it means, why we have a Republican audience, we have basically a curious audience that are looking to see, okay, what do conservative people believe that I'm hearing differently from the media, etc. Why does this matter? Why does a role like the Attorney General matter? Why does defending the principles of the Constitution matter? I mean, you do have people right now who are saying the Constitution is an ancient document. It doesn't matter anymore. We need to shred it and redo it because we're a different society than we were 300 years ago. How do you respond to that? Why are you doing what you're doing, and why does this matter?
Oh, the rule of law is so important. It all comes down to the rule of law, and the Constitution, interpreting it according to its original meaning. The original meaning of the words, that as they were intended to be, the meaning that was intended when they were written, is so important because that's how we make sure that there's one rule of law for everyone, right? One meaning for everybody, and we also make sure that it's consistent. And so if you don't go back to the original meaning of the words, then what do you have? Then you have judges that are just putting in their own meaning.
Right.
And if you have judges just putting in their own meaning into the words and just, looking at the words and saying something like, I think this should mean this because I now look at the values of society and society has changed and now I think this.
Right.
Well, then that document actually doesn't do anything. What it actually does is it takes the judges' ideas and makes them law. So then you have judges being super legislators.
Okay.
And that completely upends the rule of law. And then that means our representatives that we elect don't really have any role left because what they write in a statute.
Sometimes it feels like that,
Right,
that
exactly,
way anyway.
Yeah. right. Like we were talking about before with so many rules and things
Yeah.
that are made by unelected folks. But if the words that our elected representatives put into a statute don't have any meaning and the court can sort of pour in the meaning that they want because we're not looking at the original meaning and the original intent, well, then there's no point to having elected representatives, and you don't have rule of law. What you have is rule by courts.
Right.
And that's why it's so important. It's foundational to the rule of law. We don't have any freedoms or liberties if we don't have laws that are, simple enough to be understood, first of all, that's an important thing, and then promulgated and put out there for everyone to actually see, so we know what they are, and then also not too long. That's another good important thing, right?
Yes.
So when you have a 2,000-page healthcare bill, for example,
Right.
or when you have 100,000 different administrative rules, they're so long and there's so many of them that it's hard to know how to govern your life according to the law, and that leads to all sorts of different problems. So these kinds of principles. But it all comes back to the original meaning of the text. And there, by the way, there is a way to actually change the Constitution. If people think it's outdated, well, that's what the amendment procedure is for. So you amend the Constitution to change it, and that's how you maintain the rule of law.
What I find just incredibly interesting about all of this, talking about constitutional originalism, well, we also have, as you're well aware, because it's what you're doing on a daily basis, we have precedents that are set, because a lot of our laws are based on common law, things that have just been done forever,
Yes, yep.
So describing the Constitution as something that we need to protect, we need to honor, and we need to acknowledge as something that says what it says,
Yes.
and that is
Right.
That is what it says. I think you and I probably both agree on the fact that it was probably a little bit divine in its orchestration. But one of our battlegrounds is the courts, which is why the Attorney General position that you're running for is incredibly important.
Right.
One thing you made mention of was the efficiency of the department itself. And you talked about the staffing a little bit of the Attorney General Department. What kind of reforms can we even pull the lever on in this go-around? What can be different about the way that Minnesota does things?
Oh, so much. I mean, the Attorney General's office, you've got something on the order of 200 different attorneys and then support staff. You've got 36 different appointed positions, or actually 42. I think there are 6 deputies and 35 assistant attorney generals and then the solicitor general. And so that's a lot of attorneys. And right now...
And you guys aren't cheap, by the way.
No, attorneys aren't.
Attorneys are not cheap. So.
But Alliance Defending Freedom is nonprofit. So
okay.
Yes.
I won't ask your hourly rate, though. your nonprofit rate.
Right. So the Attorney General's office, right now, those attorneys are disproportionately tasked with consumer protection, which is an important thing that the office does, but it's not all the office does. The office should be, for example, backing county attorneys and making sure they have the resources they need when there are complex prosecutions to handle. There was a double murder in 2012 in central Minnesota, and the county there didn't have the expertise to handle the case. And so they requested help from Lori Swanson, the Attorney General's office, and they were declined. That should never happen. That should never happen. And with me as Attorney General, it would never happen. So we need to support public safety by making sure that we have the resources there to prosecute these crimes that are oftentimes very complex and difficult to prosecute. That's one way we can shift resources in the Attorney General's office. And then the other thing we need to do is have the Attorney General's office focus on election fraud. The Attorney General's office should be investigating and coordinating with county attorneys to prosecute illegal voting and election fraud, but that's simply not happening right now. Okay. And so, as Attorney General, I would create a unit within the office to deal with illegal voting. It's proving up election fraud is a very difficult thing to do because there is an intent standard, and so a county attorney may not have expertise with that, and so they might decide not to handle those kinds of cases. If we have an Attorney General, and I would do this, that is going to put resources to that and make sure that the expertise is there and coordinate with county attorneys, we can really send the message that, hey, when you illegally vote, it's going to be prosecuted because every illegal vote disenfranchises somebody else.
That's right.
And distorts elections.
Yes. So Doug, with the last kind of 30 seconds here, I'll give the floor to you. How can people get in touch with you or your campaign, figure out what you're doing, where you're going to be at, that kind of thing? Absolutely.
So 2 things. The website is www.dougwardlowag.com. Doug Wardlow and then AG for Attorney General.com. You can get a hold of me through there. Email is doug@dougwardlowag.com. And take a look at the website. We have a calendar of events going all over the state, up north and down south and east and west. And it's very exciting. The response has been excellent. People are excited about getting leadership at the top. In a lot of other states, the Attorney General's office, that race is high in prominence. But in Minnesota, it hasn't been so much. So we need to get more attention on it because it does set the tone for, the way the law is going to be interpreted and set. And it's so important to make sure that we have an Attorney General that's focused on the rule of law and the Constitution and basically lifting the burden of government off of people so we can live lives of meaning. Very good. Well, Doug, thank you so much for joining the Republican Roundtable. Thanks, guys.